In episode 82, titled WBS and KB Articles, Project Structure and Maintainable Knowledge, we treat planning artifacts as practical tools for reducing chaos in delivery, not as paperwork that exists to satisfy a process. When cloud work accelerates, the failure mode is rarely a lack of effort, but rather misaligned effort, where teams move quickly in different directions and then collide at integration time. Planning artifacts help you make the work visible, make ownership explicit, and make dependencies real, which is how you keep momentum without creating hidden risk. If you have ever watched a late-stage project scramble because nobody was sure who owned the last-mile tasks, you already understand why structure matters. Before we continue, a quick note: this audio course is a companion to the CloudNetX books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A work breakdown structure, often called a work breakdown structure, is a way to break a large effort into smaller pieces of work that are clear enough to execute and track. The main purpose is not to create an impressive hierarchy, but to map what must be done into tasks that have owners and that connect to other tasks through dependencies. Tasks should be framed as deliverables or outcomes rather than vague activity, because outcomes can be checked, accepted, and closed. Owners should be accountable for completion, even if they delegate parts of the task, because accountability prevents tasks from drifting into the "someone will handle it" zone. Dependencies should reflect reality, like identity prerequisites before access changes, or network readiness before service cutover, because ignoring dependencies is how timelines become fantasy. A knowledge base article, often called a knowledge base article, captures stable knowledge that answers repeated questions and reduces the need to rediscover the same facts during every incident or change window. Stable knowledge includes things like service purpose, known failure modes, escalation paths, and how to interpret common signals, because those do not change every day, even if the environment evolves. A good knowledge base article is not a diary of everything that ever happened, but a curated reference that helps a responder get oriented quickly and act safely. Knowledge base content is especially valuable when onboarding new staff, because it turns institutional memory into a shared asset rather than a hidden advantage held by a few veterans. When done well, knowledge base articles become the steady background layer that makes runbooks and incident response faster and less stressful. Using a work breakdown structure to surface risks, timelines, and resource constraints is where it becomes more than a checklist and starts functioning as a management instrument. Once tasks and dependencies are explicit, you can see critical paths, where a delay in one prerequisite will cascade into later work, and you can plan around that instead of discovering it at the last moment. Ownership also reveals resource constraints, because you can see when one person or one team has too many parallel tasks, which is often the real reason projects slip. Risks show up when tasks have unclear acceptance criteria, or when dependencies involve external teams or vendors, because those are classic sources of schedule uncertainty. This is also where you can make trade-offs rationally, because you can choose to reduce scope, add resources, or adjust sequencing with eyes open rather than under pressure. Using a knowledge base to reduce tribal knowledge and on-call load is a direct operational benefit, and it tends to pay off faster than most people expect. Tribal knowledge is the unspoken set of facts that experienced operators carry in their heads, like which alerts are noisy, which dependencies are fragile, and which changes require special caution. When that knowledge is not captured, on-call becomes a game of finding the one person who remembers the right detail, and that increases stress, delays resolution, and risks burnout. A knowledge base article can offload the repeated questions, like what the service does, what normal looks like, and who owns what, so responders spend their energy on diagnosis and action rather than orientation. Over time, a strong knowledge base also improves consistency because responders are guided toward the same interpretation of signals and the same escalation paths. Keeping these artifacts simple, searchable, and aligned with operations is the difference between tools people use and documents people ignore. Simplicity means the work breakdown structure focuses on the level of detail that supports coordination and tracking while leaving implementation detail where it belongs, such as in engineering tasks or runbooks. Searchability means consistent naming, predictable structure, and keywords that match how operators think, because people under pressure do not browse, they search. Alignment with operations means the artifacts reflect how work is actually executed, including change windows, approval paths, and operational validation, rather than an idealized flow that only exists in a diagram. When artifacts reflect reality, teams trust them, and trust is what drives adoption. When artifacts drift from reality, teams route around them, and then the artifacts become dead weight. Consider a scenario where a cloud migration requires a cutover from an old endpoint to a new endpoint, with a rollback plan that must be ready if performance or authentication breaks. A work breakdown structure clarifies the cutover tasks by separating preparation from execution and from validation, and by assigning owners to each piece, such as readiness checks, communication, traffic shift, and post-cutover monitoring. Dependencies become visible, like ensuring identity permissions are in place before shifting traffic, or ensuring monitoring dashboards reflect the new service path before declaring success. Rollback readiness can be treated as a first-class task with acceptance criteria, such as verifying the old path remains deployable and that rollback steps have been validated in a non-production environment. By making rollback explicit rather than implied, the project moves from optimism to resilience. This structure also reduces the risk of an all-hands scramble because the last-mile tasks are known ahead of time and owned. A common pitfall is making the work breakdown structure so detailed that it becomes unreadable, ignored, and outdated almost immediately. Excessive detail often tries to encode every engineering action, which turns the planning artifact into a duplicate of the implementation system and guarantees it will fall behind. When that happens, the work breakdown structure stops being a coordination tool and becomes a noisy artifact that no one trusts, so people stop updating it and stop consulting it. The right level of detail is the level at which work can be owned, tracked, and coordinated across teams, not the level at which every command and configuration change is described. If a task cannot be explained clearly in a few sentences, it probably needs to be broken down differently or moved into a more appropriate operational document. The goal is to keep the artifact lightweight enough to stay current while still being informative enough to manage risk. Another pitfall is a knowledge base without ownership, because unowned knowledge rots, and rotted knowledge misleads responders at exactly the wrong moment. When an article is stale, it can point to the wrong escalation path, describe a dependency that no longer exists, or recommend a diagnostic approach that produces false conclusions. Responders often trust written guidance during stressful situations, so incorrect guidance is worse than no guidance because it increases confidence in the wrong action. Ownership means someone is responsible for accuracy, and it also means changes in architecture have a clear place to be reflected in the knowledge layer. Without ownership, the knowledge base becomes a museum of past truths, and the operational team learns to ignore it, which defeats the purpose. The knowledge base must be treated as an operational control, not a nice-to-have. A quick win that improves both artifacts is to assign owners and a review cadence, because regular review is what keeps structure and knowledge aligned with a changing cloud environment. Ownership should be explicit and durable, meaning tied to a team role rather than a single person when possible, because staff changes are inevitable. Review cadence should match volatility, where high-change services need more frequent review and stable services can be reviewed less often, because you want effort proportional to risk. Reviews do not have to be long, but they should confirm that ownership, dependencies, and escalation paths remain accurate, and that the artifact still matches how work is executed. Over time, this creates a culture where artifacts are expected to stay correct, which reduces the friction of keeping them up to date. The result is less surprise during delivery and less confusion during incidents. Operationally, it is valuable to link knowledge base articles to runbooks, diagrams, and the configuration management database, often called a configuration management database, because these artifacts are strongest when they reinforce each other. A knowledge base article can provide the service overview and common failure modes, while a runbook provides the step guidance for specific actions, and a diagram provides the mental model for traffic paths and control points. The configuration management database connection helps establish what is in scope, what components exist, and who owns them, which is critical when responders need to understand impact quickly. Linking is not about creating a maze of documents, but about ensuring that the responder can move from orientation to action without reinventing context. When the links are maintained, you reduce the number of times someone asks the same question on a bridge call, and you reduce the probability of acting on an outdated assumption. This is how knowledge becomes maintainable rather than merely documented. A helpful memory anchor is plan work, capture answers, keep ownership clear, because it summarizes the roles of these artifacts in a way operators can recall quickly. Plan work is the work breakdown structure function, where you make tasks, owners, and dependencies visible so delivery stays coordinated and risks are surfaced early. Capture answers is the knowledge base function where repeated questions have stable, searchable responses that reduce on-call load and shorten time to resolution. Keep ownership clear applies to both, because ownership is what keeps artifacts from drifting into irrelevance and what makes updates part of normal operations. When this anchor is applied consistently, teams know where to put information and what to expect from each artifact. That predictability reduces friction, which is exactly what you want when workload and complexity increase. To sharpen judgment, it helps to practice choosing whether a piece of knowledge belongs in a work breakdown structure or a knowledge base article, because mixing them is a common source of clutter. If the information describes a unit of work, an owner, a dependency, or a timeline-related constraint, it tends to belong in the work breakdown structure because its purpose is coordination and delivery tracking. If the information answers a repeated question, describes how the system behaves, or explains stable operational context like ownership, service purpose, and known failure modes, it tends to belong in the knowledge base. Some information is related, like cutover validation steps, where the high-level activity may appear in the work breakdown structure, while the detailed verification procedure belongs in a runbook linked from the knowledge base. The important part is not perfection, but consistency, because consistency is what keeps artifacts usable. As you apply this choice repeatedly, you naturally reduce duplication and improve searchability. Episode 82 comes down to treating structure and knowledge as operational enablers, where the work breakdown structure keeps delivery coherent and the knowledge base keeps operations sustainable. When these artifacts are lightweight, owned, and reviewed, they reduce chaos by making work visible and by making answers reusable. When they are overbuilt, unowned, or stale, they become noise, and noise is the enemy of both delivery and response. The assignment here is an artifact mapping drill, where you take a small slice of a cloud change and map the coordination elements into a work breakdown structure, while mapping the stable reference elements into a knowledge base article. That single drill tends to reveal gaps in ownership, unclear dependencies, and missing operational context, which is exactly the kind of early insight that prevents late-stage surprises. With practice, you will find that these artifacts are not a layer on top of engineering, but a way to make engineering outcomes predictable and maintainable. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.